Hey. I can't hear you yet, Detlev. I can't hear you. Can you hear me? Hmm. Oh. Mm-hmm. 1 second.
I think this did the trick.
I think so.
Yeah, well, very good. So we found each other.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna make all of the speakers co-hosts because I don't want people who aren't supposed to be unmuted to be unmuting themselves.
Well, if you have a large call with lots of participants, it makes sense to unmute everybody, because if just one or two forget and there's a dog barking in the back and things like that, you never know. So it's quite uncommon to be muted. But certainly if you present, you don't want to be muted.
No, that would be a significantly less interesting presentation.
Well, good. So did you get my emails this morning?
I did.
Okay.
So, and I have your slides, and it looks like I was able to open them just fine on Google, and then I got your little blurb.
So do you want to present the slides and advance them, or do you want me to do it?
Totally up to you. I have them open just in case, but if you want to share your screen and go through the slides yourself, that's totally fine as well.
Yeah, that may be easier. That saves a little bit of time also. So then you need to allow me to share my screen.
Yes, I'm gonna, let's see here. You should be, I just made you a co-host. Let's see here.
Okay.
Sharing options. Okay. Did that let you do it, or do I still need to do the?
So let's try. Do a practice. So let me see.
I may still need to adjust the thing. It's just like,
Okay, share screen. Okay, I can.
Is it not letting you?
Let's see. No.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna enable it. The thing is I'm only allowed to enable it for like all participants or only me. So it's like,
It's a bit
hopefully
risky.
we don't have any surprises.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it'll be fine. Okay, I just enabled screen sharing for you.
Okay, let me try. Cannot do that yet. Advanced sharing, share screen. It does not allow me to share the screen.
It's still, I selected the box where it says all participants can share their screen.
Mm-hmm. And I can see that same box now.
Mm-hmm.
But usually if I want to share my screen,
Hey, Kate.
Hi there.
You survived your COGCC deadline.
Not yet. The website crashed.
Oh.
I want us to keep trying, so I'll keep trying after this.
Oh, my
Or
God.
Oh,
maybe
there we
not.
go. Sorry.
Oh, you got it?
Yeah, so let me try this. What do you see on your screen
I
now?
see your screen. Perfect.
With the PowerPoint
I do.
and climate impacts?
Yep, that's the
Okay,
one.
that's the one. Because I have two monitors, you know, I have to make sure I share the. Let me see if I do now. Do you see it full screen now?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, and it advances. Okay.
I am planning on notifying people privately in the chat when they're nearing their time limit, just to try and keep people somewhat on track. You may not be able to see that if you have your screen shared all the way. So
Oh yeah.
so if I just
You
kind of take
can
myself,
you can just throw a ball at me or something.
I'll just maybe take myself off mute, like if you are going past the time, and what would you like the code word to be?
Well, you know, and I can just start my clock here too if you're.
Okay, that sounds great.
Just started on my phone. It should work. So then let me see. How do I now stop sharing? Okay, stop share up here. There we go.
Okay.
How many people do you expect to be on this call?
Well, for like the Zoom link, we had about 80 people registered, but then we're live streaming it on Facebook to like 12 different Facebook pages. So it would be hard to know, like from our Zoom call, how many people are actually watching, because there will be a lot of people on social media, hopefully. So, which reminds me, I should probably start figuring that out. Hey, Barbara, do you want me to be sharing your slides, or you want to share your screen?
Why don't you share the slides, and I will be, I'll just say the next, slide or slide 4, whatever. That'd be okay. It's pretty obvious. It just advance them for me.
Yes.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
My question.
Just welcoming on everybody. Leslie, if we can hop off onto video and microphone, just so we can make sure we can see and hear you, that would be fabulous.
Oh, there's Mike.
Hey everybody.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How y'all doing? Hope everyone's all right. So I'm gonna I'm not going till the end, and there's something I have to file with the COGCC.
Kate was just talking about this.
I was just failing at that.
Yeah.
I think the website crashed.
Oh, well, for me, it was probably user error. But at any rate, I'm going to be listening. I'm just going to have my video off until it's my time to go, if that's okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So totally.
Okay.
Can I
don't have any slides. I'm just kind of giving a 5-minute overview, and of course, be available for Q&A.
Yes. Yeah. That's perfect. Yeah. If you can just cover like a little bit about SB 181 and then sort of the opportunity with local regs, and that'll set Kate up perfectly to be like, we're trying to pass local regs.
Cool.
And then stick around. That would be awesome.
Okay.
And obviously, like,
so much.
We have a pretty packed agenda. So if folks can stay on for Q&A, if we have a little bit of capacity for that at the end, great. But if you also need to hop off, like totally want to respect, like if 7 p.m. is your cutoff time, like feel free to bail, no worries.
They probably will be for me, because I think we're going to be having dinner right around that time, but I'll stay on.
No worries. Yeah, no worries.
Okay, cool.
Kate, I just made you a co-host. If you can
I let people in? I'm not sure.
Not people yet. Stephanie. Oh, there she is. Hello.
Hi, Stephanie.
Thank you, everybody. Okay.
How's everybody doing? Sorry, I was on mute. Sorry to, you would think I would know that by now. I'm freaking teaching on Zoom this semester, but you know.
All good. I am just setting up the Facebook Live.
How's everyone doing after the storm? Good.
My back is a bit sore from
I
3 hours
know.
of shoveling.
I shoveled yesterday because we have a little baby, so I was like, I would love to just get out of the house and, you know, be doing something. I shoveled for 4 hours, and we have like one driveway and a corner sidewalk lot, and I was like, it was some of the heaviest snow I've ever shoveled here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was pretty.
It was kind of crazy. We lived in Rhode Island, so there it was really, you know, really heavy, but we rarely had to shovel out there.
How old's your baby now, Stephanie?
He's 7 months.
Oh, wow.
He's a real cutie too. He's so cute.
Congratulations.
If things get slow, we can have him make a guest appearance.
Yeah.
Everyone loves the baby, right? It's funny, some of the meetings I've been in on Zoom, they're like, so where's your baby? The only reason why you're inviting me, I think, to these things.
It's like baby show and tell and pet show and tell are the best.
Mm.
Best kind of.
I've had my granddaughter is 7 months old, 8 months old now, I think. And I have her during the day. So, and my grandson, they live upstairs, so they're always popping in for my meetings.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Many Zoom meetings, and I was just thinking today, it's like my idea of dressing up was to put a scarf on so you can't see the goo that's on my shirt.
I know, I'm in the same boat. I put a sweater on over my other shirt because I was like,
yeah, right.
And I look presentable.
Yeah, definitely still wearing pajama pants right now. So, well, thanks everybody for being here. Okay, here's our translator. So, Kate, you'll just want to also. Do you have an option to record the meeting on your thing?
It says recording right now. Let me see.
Hi, Luis.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Hey.
Sorry, my last meeting ran late. Good to see everyone.
How do I get you locked and loaded here?
Let me see. Do you see a small globe on the bottom right hand? I see that you're the host. Okay.
Yes.
So right there, just from the participants list, you can just pick out my name and then you can hit start. But at the beginning, I usually just take the first minute or two just to give the instructions of how it'll work in Spanish and in English. And then we can start the interpretation. Does that work?
Yeah. Do you know if we can like record a separate recording of the Spanish version?
Yeah, if someone on your team can just join my Spanish channel and then stay on that channel and just hit record. It should save.
Okay, cool. Okay, so
Perfect.
I should just go ahead and click start for the interpretation right now.
We can wait on that unless we want to try it right now. That way I can address the entire room, because once we activate it, only into the Spanish and into whichever channel I'm speaking, people will be able to hear me.
Okay, so you want me to try it right now or wait?
If you would like to. Would that be helpful?
I don't know. Never done it before, so. But I think I got it. I can see your name on here, and then it's the English and Spanish.
And then English and Spanish. Yeah, so it should be fine.
Okay, cool. And yeah, so Kate, when you go onto that channel, just text me if there's any problems. Do you have a Mac by chance?
I do.
Do you know how to record your screen on your Mac?
Oh, I don't know that I do.
I think it's like Command-Shift-5.
Command-Shift-5?
Or maybe that's like, hold on.
I can Google it on my phone.
Okay. Okay, so let's see. I'm just looking to see who else, if there's any of our other speakers that are waiting. Eric, Christine, Leslie, can y'all hear us? Can we see you? You want to just test your audio really quickly before I start letting people in?
We can hear you.
Okay, great.
Do you need us to turn our camera on?
I think not yet, but when y'all are speaking, that would be great if people can see you. Hi.
Okay. Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Hello. You too.
Hi, Christine.
Hi.
Hey. How's it going, everybody? Thank you so much for being here. Really excited about this. I'm just trying to think of anybody that we're missing. Let me look at my notes.
So,
Okay.
Julia, do you want me to record my screen like as a backup recording for this room for the Spanish if the Zoom recording doesn't work?
Yeah, because I'm recording the English version right now. So if you can, I think that's the best backup option, honestly.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay, awesome. Okay, I am going to get us rolling here. And then who is SCHS Fisher 525543?
I'm Jordan. My NHS teacher just told us that we could come to this for some credit.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm just here to watch.
No, all good. I just wanted to make sure that you didn't need like audio and stuff like that to be speaking.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
you're good. It's just my school iPad, so that's what it comes up as.
Okay, cool. And I see Larry here and Leslie here. I think, I feel like we're missing Kristin Logan. Let's see, that's who we're missing. Let me just message her on Facebook and then I'll let people in.
Kate, before we get everybody logged in, I'm so sorry I didn't reply to your text earlier.
Oh, no problem. No, everybody
Just got caught up in stuff, but we're here.
You're here. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks everyone for being here. We really, really appreciate you. So that's great. And yeah, it's been a crazy time lately. For sure. For sure.
Okay, awesome. I am just trying to get the Facebook Live is all set up and now it's not. So I'm gonna just try this again. Maybe we waited too long. And then we'll let people in right afterwards. So Luis, do you want me to just like give you a second at the very beginning to introduce yourself and let people know how to join?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you. It should only take about 2 minutes.
Okay, awesome. Okay. I'm getting the live stream set up. Kate, you can go ahead and start introducing folks. And if you can like let them know just some logistics that we're letting people in, if you can just start letting people into the Zoom. Admitting people and then just letting people know to stay on mute, and that will be starting in just a second.
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on our first virtual Tour de Frack. If everyone could stay on mute until the question and answer period, that would be fantastic. We have some fantastic speakers today. We've got Dr. Stephanie Maylin, Detlev Helmig here joining us to talk about, there's more people, sorry, I'm admitting them in the room. And we're gonna start in just a couple minutes. Should we have Luis start with?
Let's just wait until 5:35 to make sure that everybody's here who's supposed to be here or wants to be here.
That sounds great.
Okay, and we should be going live.
Yeah, that's what it.
Okay.
Fantastic.
All right, people are coming in.
Huh?
Okay. Awesome. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our first ever virtual Tour de Frack. We, 350 Colorado, have hosted annual Tour de Frack for the last couple of years, where we brought community members out to various oil and gas and fracking sites around the Front Range, but it's COVID and we can't all get in a van and drive around together to go learn about fracking. And so we are bringing you the virtual Tour de Frack tonight. We have some excellent speakers. Wanted to go over some logistics first and then the agenda. We are recording this, so you definitely will be able to share it We are also live streaming on a variety of different Facebook pages. Please keep yourself on mute to prevent any background noise. You are welcome to ask questions in the chat throughout the course of the event. We're going to try to have time for Q&A at the end. We got a lot of content we're trying to get through, so we'll try to be answering questions in the chat during the event as well. And then we'll potentially stay on just a couple of minutes afterwards if folks have any burning questions. At least I'll stay on a couple of minutes afterwards. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce Luis, who is going to be offering us some Spanish interpretation for the evening so that he can tell you all how that's going to work.
Perfect, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Luis Gomez. I'm here with the Community Language Cooperative, and today we're going to use a simultaneous interpretation feature through Zoom. Once we turn it on, you'll see a small globe appear on the bottom right hand of your screen. If you're joining us through a computer, if you're joining through a cell phone or a tablet, you can select the 3 dots option where it says more, and the interpretation feature can be found there. There you'll be able to select if you wish to participate in English or in Spanish so that we're all able to listen, participate, ask questions in the language of our heart, the language that we speak with our families. Muy buenas tardes, mi nombre es Luis Gómez, estoy aquí como intérprete de español con la Cooperativa Comunitaria de Lenguaje y hoy vamos a utilizar una función de interpretación simultánea a través de Zoom. Ya que la activemos, verán un pequeño globo terráqueo en la parte de la derecha de abajo de su pantalla si se une por una computadora. Si se une con un teléfono celular o una tableta, podrá seleccionar los 3 puntos donde dice más y ahí podrá encontrar la función y seleccionar si desea participar en inglés o en español para todos poder comunicarnos, hacer preguntas, participar de la misma manera en el idioma de nuestro corazón, el que hablamos con nuestras familias. Si en cualquier momento tiene alguna pregunta o problema técnico, nos podemos comunicar a través del chat. If at any point throughout the meeting you have any questions or any issues, we can communicate via the chat. Right now, we can go ahead and start the feature and we'll be all set. Thank you so much. All right, I see it. I'll test that both channels are working and we'll be good.
Okay. Awesome. And getting a thumbs up. And we are live on Facebook. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can start this thing. Okay, awesome. Welcome to everybody that is just joining. This is our virtual tour de Frack. So our agenda for the evening, we're going to cover a little bit of intro information here. We're going to have some expert presentations on air and climate impacts, health impacts, and social justice impacts from some amazing speakers. And then we're going to hear from some impacted community members from all across Colorado about how fracking is impacting their communities, their families, and their lives. Then we'll get a bit of an update on state and local regulations from Mike Foote and learn more ways that you can take action on fracking here in Colorado. And I am actually just I'm gonna stop the share really quickly so I can make sure that I have the video, audio enabled. Perfect, because I have a video that we are gonna watch. Okay, can you see my screen? Thumbs up? Awesome. My name is Julia Williams. I am the Communications and Development Director for 350 Colorado, and I will be leading you through this evening tonight with my co-host, Kate. Kate, you want to introduce yourself really quickly? I can hear you.
Hi, Julia. Oh. Okay, sorry, I missed the last part of what you said.
Oh, I just wanted you to introduce yourself.
Okay, sorry about that. Hi, I'm Kate. I'm the new oil and gas campaign coordinator for 350 Colorado.
Awesome.
And I appreciate everyone being here.
Thanks, Kate. As we mentioned, we're going to try and have time for Q&A at the end. We've got a lot of stuff to get through. So I'll be staying on at least 15 minutes after 7 to answer any burning questions. But again, feel free to start typing questions in the chat. We'll try to get to as many as possible. And I'll be sending a bunch of follow-up information for folks that'll hopefully try and answer any questions as well. So I'm going to start with this video, and then we'll go after that.
Deep underground lie stores of once inaccessible natural gas. This gas was likely formed over millions of years as layers of decaying organisms were exposed to intense heat and pressure under the Earth's crust. There's a technology called hydraulic fracturing, or fracking, that can extract this natural gas, potentially powering us for decades to come. So how does fracking work, and why is it a source of such heated controversy? A fracking site can be anywhere with natural gas, from a remote desert to several hundred feet from your backyard. It starts out with a long vertical hole, known as a well bore, drilled down through layers of sediment. When the well reaches 2,500 to 3,000 meters, it's at its kickoff point, where it can begin the process of horizontal drilling. It turns 90 degrees and extends horizontally for about 1.5 kilometers through a compressed black layer called the shale rock formation. A specialized perforating gun is then lowered and fired, creating a series of small inch-long holes that burst through the well's casing into the rock layer. About 3 to 4 months after the initial drilling, the well is ready for fracking to begin. Fracking fluid is pumped down into the well at a pressure so high it cracks the shale rock, creating fractures through which the trapped gas and oil can escape. The fluid itself is more than 90% water. The rest is made up of concentrated chemical additives. These vary depending on the specific characteristics of the fracking site, but usually fall into 3 categories. Acids for clearing debris and dissolving minerals, friction-reducing compounds to create a slippery form of water known as slick water, and disinfectant to prevent bacteria growth. Sand or clay is also mixed into the water to prop open the fissures so the gas and oil can keep leaking out, even after the pressure is released. It's estimated that all of fracking's intense pumping and flushing uses an average of 3 to 6 million gallons of water per well. That's actually not a lot compared to agriculture, power plants, or even golf course maintenance, but it can have a notable impact on local water supply. And disposing of used fracking water is also an issue. Along with the trapped gas that's pumped up to the surface, millions of gallons of flowback liquid come gushing up. This liquid, containing contaminants like radioactive material, salts, heavy metals, and hydrocarbons, needs to be stored and disposed of. That's usually done in pits on site, in deep wells, or off-site at water treatment facilities. Another option is to recycle the flowback liquid, but the recycling process can actually increase levels of contamination since the water is more toxic with each use. Wells are typically encased in steel and cement to prevent contaminants from leaking into groundwater. But any negligence or fracking-related accidents can have devastating effects. Fracturing directly into underground water, hazardous underground seepage and leakage, and inadequate treatment and disposal of highly toxic wastewater can potentially contaminate drinking water around a fracking site. There's also concern about the threat of earthquakes and damaged infrastructure from pressure and wastewater injection. Links between fracking and increased seismic activity leave unresolved questions about long-term pressure imbalances that might be happening deep beneath our feet. Fracking's biggest controversy, though, is happening above the ground. The general consensus is that burning natural gas is better for the environment than burning coal, since the gas collected from fracking emits only half the carbon dioxide as coal per unit of energy. The pollution caused by the fracking itself, though, isn't negligible. Methane that leaks out during the drilling and pumping process is many times more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. Some scientists argue that methane eventually dissipates, so has a relatively low long-term impact. But a greater question hangs in the air. Does fracking take time, money, and research away from the development of cleaner, renewable energy sources? Natural gas is non-renewable, and the short-run economic interests supporting fracking may fall short in the face of global climate change. Experts are still examining fracking's overarching effects. Although modern fracking has been around since the 1940s, it's boomed in the last few decades as other sources of natural gas decrease, the costs of non-renewable energies rise, and cutting-edge technologies make it so accessible. But many countries and regions have already banned fracking in response to environmental concerns. It's undeniable that fracking has reshaped the energy landscape around the world. But for what long-term benefit, and at what cost?
Okay, awesome. Can you still hear me, Kate? Can everybody still hear me? Perfect, awesome. So fracking in Colorado has been around for a long time. The first recorded oil well was actually drilled in 1901. Again, that's oil. And they switched to hydraulic fracturing, which is a relatively new style of drilling for oil and gas. The first time that hydraulic fracturing was used near Rifle, Colorado, which was actually in 1969. This is a map from the Denver Post that shows all of the oil and gas wells that have been drilled across Colorado. There have been over 80,000 wells drilled in Colorado. The predominant amount of fracking wells that are happening in various shale basins across Colorado, which we'll talk more about later. So you can see on this map, there's some differences between currently producing wells and active wells and dry and abandoned wells, but this map really highlights that there is oil and gas infrastructure all over our state. This map from the Oil and Gas Threat Map, which is a resource that I'll share with everybody after the call as well, really highlights where the fracking is happening in Colorado right now. All of these black dots are fracking wells. So because of this, there are 13 Colorado counties with an elevated cancer risk concern and over 300,000, 56,000 Coloradans that live less than a mile from an active oil and gas well at this moment. So you can see here at the bottom, the map indicates where there are significant air toxic risks, and we have multiple Colorado counties that are at the highest level of air toxic risk from this oil and gas infrastructure. So if you're driving around Colorado, fracking can look a lot of different ways. Most people think that the traditional sort of pump jack oil rigs that you see that sort of move up and down are what fracking is, but that's actually traditional oil and gas drilling. When you're seeing fracking, it can look a variety of different ways in Colorado, so definitely be keeping an eye out for all of these phases. When you see this big rig right here, that's when they're drilling the hole. When you see the sound walls up, you know, that's when they're fracking, that's when they're in these very noisy parts of production. You can see lots and lots of trucks and infrastructure and semi-trucks and water trucks that'll be driving in and out of a fracking site. So it's not just the actual frack site that's impacting local communities, it's all of the infrastructure that comes along with it. And then after it's all said and done and the well is just sort of sitting there producing, it'll sort of look like this. It can look a little unassuming in comparison to this big, massive drill rig when it's just the tanks and the wells that are there afterwards. So I want to turn it over. We're going to turn over to our expert presentations, and I want to turn it over first to Detlev Helmig. Detlev is an atmospheric scientist who over the past 10 years has spent a considerable amount of time studying air and climate impacts from oil and gas development. He's the editor-in-chief of the online publication series, Oil and Natural Gas Development, Air Quality, Climate Science and Policy, and he also oversees an air monitoring network in the Colorado Front Range that specifically tailors the study of air quality impacts from the Colorado oil and gas industry emissions. So I'll stop sharing my screen, Detlev, and you can go ahead and say hi and share your screen.
Okay, well, thanks for the introduction and thanks for the invite. Can you see my screen, I hope? Thumbs up? Yes, good. So I was asked to talk about air and climate impacts in 10 minutes, which impossible. Can't do this. This could take hours and hours. So I'm going to throw a few things at you over 10 minutes, and then I'll leave it up to you on how to follow up on it. So Julia already made a good point. There's some 10 or so fracking rigs active here in Colorado or in the Front Range, more or less. And there's something like 25,000 wells. So when it comes to the air and quality, climate impacts, it's not really the fracking sites themselves that cause the overwhelming abundance of the impacts. It's the whole system. It's the infrastructure. There's wells, there's pipelines, there's flaring, there's transportation, there's processing. So the fracking kind of accommodates the oil and gas development, but the fracking sites itself, it's actually a small number that are out there compared to the number of producing wells and maintained wells. So that's one complication. And then it gets more complicated and more complicated and more complicated. When it comes to oil and gas development, it's not like some other air pollution issues we've dealt with in the past, acid rain or radioactivity from nuclear plants and PCBs, where you had like one pollutant and one type of source. Here it's a whole series of different types of emissions that we're looking at and that we're dealing with, and they have them here on this list. And even more so, some of them then combine in the atmosphere and they form ozone, which is a secondary pollutant, which is a major issue as well. So among all of these, when it comes to air quality, I've highlighted those in red here. There's the fracking agent, there's diesel exhaust, nitrogen oxides, dust, particulate matter. There's then the petroleum hydrocarbons that can end up in the air. There's hydrogen sulfide, there's radioactivity, that all contributes to air pollution problems, air quality. Now, looking at the climate impacts, I switched this around. Now it says climate impacts. You can see it's still pretty much all red. So that's an important thing here, because many of the pollutants that impact air quality also impact the climate. There's a lot of overlap. So it matters in both arenas. So let's look at some of, just picked a few examples here from the Colorado Front Range, what we're ending up with in atmospheric impacts. This is a study that goes a few years back and that kind of then triggered more follow-up research. What that is these are data here in these two graphs from 5 different locations, and those are these red stars you see on this map here. So this is in Boulder, then there's 2 in Lafayette. One is the Dawson High School along 285, and then a park in Longmont. And we sampled there through the whole summer, and then looked at the levels in methane and ethane, which is an oil and gas tracer, and they're listed here from going from west to east. And you can see as you go from the foothills of the mountains towards further the east, this concentrations gets higher, there's more variability, it varies more from low to high. So that clearly showed that the more you head into the oil and gas area, the more of these oil and gas petroleum hydrocarbons you're seeing in the atmosphere. And that then triggered more follow-up monitoring. And there was really some red flags that were raised in these earlier studies. So then over the last 4 years, a much more sophisticated network has been established. And I show that here with these stars. There's 5 of these continuous monitoring sites right now, and you can see how they relate to the oil and gas wells, which are all these dots here on this map. There's 2 in Longmont, 1 at the Boulder Reservoir, and 2 in Broomfield. And to show you who's paying for this, it's actually you, mostly through tax money, but it's funded by the city of Longmont, Boulder County, the CDPHE, and also the city and county of Broomfield. So I will just show you a few examples of how this works and what sort of data we get from this. What's unique here is that these observations, they're happening right now all the time. This is working continuously, and it's going within minutes to a public website or several websites, so that anybody out there can follow this any time, year round. And these results are then plotted on these websites in tables and in graphs. Here's some examples that show you actually all of these put together in some of these graphs. The top three are just the meteorology, but then if you look at the lower graphs, you see 3 days of data showing methane, ozone, nitric oxide, and then it keeps going and going. There's many others included here. So this gives you the opportunity to actually watch these different air pollutants in your neighborhood around the corner. So to show you some examples, what we're seeing in this, first of all, this is a comparison of the air that moves into the region. And here we use data from Nivard Ridge, which is up the mountains near the peak-to-peak highway, and then the Boulder Reservoir. And some of you may have seen this already, but I really like this slide because it shows so nicely the very stark difference in concentrations we see once you're down here in the Front Range, in this basin, where these emissions accumulate. So this is one of these oil and gas tracers, ethane. These graphs are on the same scale, and it shows ethane at Nivard Ridge and ethane at the Boulder Reservoir. And you can see very nicely how at the Boulder Reservoir, it goes up and down, up and down, up and down all year round. This is a year and a half of data, and levels there are much higher overall than in the air that's moving into the region. This now moves the data into just a 3 months, 6 months window. There's another compound that's methane we're concerned about as a climate gas. And this shows the data from Boulder to the 2 Longmont sites and then the Broomfield sites. And again, it shows a little bit nicer how it goes up and down, up and down, up and down, how you have these spikes all the time, any time of the year. And that causes methane to go up very quickly. I think the next slide, zooms in just on one of these spikes. This is from the Longmont Union Reservoir, and you can see how short this is. This is just a 14 minutes duration where methane goes up by a factor of 15. The background is 2 parts per million, and it went all above 30 here, just for 15 minutes. So that's important to understand when you live here. It's not like the air is always heavy and rich of these pollutants, but it goes up and down all the time. It spikes, it jumps around very quickly. And the closer you are to these oil and gas development areas, the more of these spikes you get and the higher these spikes you get. So having this much data, what we can do very nicely, we can look at the dependency of these elevated concentrations by wind direction. So what you see on the left side here is a kind of a wind rose, and it shows the concentration of the oil and gas tracers in these different wind sectors. And you can see, when the winds come from the north, the east, the southeast, there's a lot of red, which is, airflow that's come over the oil and gas area, much more frequent and much more higher concentrations, whereas airflow from the west over the mountains, all blue, very much lower levels. And then we can take this further and further, where we do this, we take measurements every minute, and you combine, thousands of these measurements, we get these heat maps where you kind of figured yourself in the middle of this map. This is where the site is, which is this data are from Longmont. And you can see here these signatures. These are ratios of VOCs. So when air comes from the north and from the east, you can see how different these chemical signatures are, how different the composition of the atmosphere is, depending on where the air comes from and how windy it is. So this goes from low wind speeds to high wind speeds. So even if it's windy and the air comes from the north, you can see a much different signature than air that comes from the west, from the mountains. So we have very nice tools in our hands to see these chemical signatures from the oil and gas sites. And I want to show you one more nice case example we have here. This is from the Broomfield sites, where we observed here at the Livingston site. It's about the nicest, the most defined, clearly defined signature we've seen, with elevated concentrations here in acetylene and in benzene, just from this very narrowly defined sector here. And if you look at this closer on a map here, you can see the Livingston site is right here. We have data from another site, because there's two of these sites in Broomfield here. This is the second one. And when we look the data from here, you can see that the plumes come from here. Here they come from here, and it overlaps, crosses over right here. At one of the well paths. Very nice example that shows you how you can get these elevated oil and gas tracers when you get flow over some of these facilities. One more slide on some of the data here. I've showed earlier that one of the pollutants we really worry about in the context here is actually something that gets formed from all these oil and gas emissions, and this is ozone. So when we take the ozone data from the Boda Reservoir and look at, where's the air coming, it also shows very nicely how this is aligned with the density of the oil and gas area. So you see here's where we are, with where the measurements are taken, and then the colors show you, how high the ozone is on average when the air has traveled over these different segments. And on the right, this shows you where the air came from when actually the air standard, the National Ambient Air Quality Standard, was exceeded. Well, I'm already a couple of minutes over. As I said, it's impossible to do this in 10 minutes. If you want to look at more of this, I've worked on this article, and it got published last year, and that's some 15 pages of a summary on the air quality impacts here, specifically looking at the issues that have been addressed in the Front Range. So I'm sure this was more you could follow in this short time window. So, this is something you could take a look if you want to know more, or, get in touch with me, and I'd be happy to discuss any of these questions further. So with that, I'll turn it back to Julia. Thank you.
Thank you, Detlev. I see some questions coming in the chat. I'm not sure if you want to just try and answer those in the chat, and then I'll keep a couple of them for later if we have time as well. But there are some folks who have questions for you.
Okay, I'll be happy to do that. Yeah.
Awesome. And then I'm gonna start sharing my screen here. I would love to next introduce Barbara from Physicians for Social Responsibility, who's going to be talking to us about health impacts. PSR Colorado works to elevate the voices of health professionals in regard to protecting the public from the health impacts of hydraulic fracturing, the climate crisis, and exposures to other toxic substances on current and future generations. PSR advocates for solutions to resilience on fossil fuels and nuclear energy. Barbara, who will be our speaker and presenter tonight, has a master's degree in public health from the Colorado School of Public Health and has served on the board of directors of PSR and is a founding member. She's also lived in Colorado for almost 50 years and has been an active member of PSR National since 1981. Sorry. So I'm going to share my screen, Barbara, and then you just let me know how you want me to progress through your slides, okay? Barbara, are you there? You might be on mute.
Thank you. You'd think I'd have it by now, the mute thing.
We're all working on it.
I know. Okay, thank you, folks. Thanks for this opportunity to speak, and thanks to all of you for arranging this, and for those who are on the call, and for caring about this issue. These next two slides, you can go to the first one. These next two statements are from the 7th edition of the Compendium of Scientific, Medical, and Media Findings Demonstrating Risk and Harms of Fracking. Quite a mouthful. And this basically summarizes PSR Colorado's stance on health and fracking, that there's no evidence that it can be practiced in a manner that does not threaten human health directly and without imperiling climate change. The next statement was on next slide. The risk and harms of fracking are inherent to its operation. The only method of mitigating its grave threats to public health and the climate is a complete and comprehensive ban on fracking. And of course, we know that that's not on the radar screen imminently for Colorado, but that's what we're shooting for. I'm going to mention a little bit about disproportionate exposure, but I think Stephanie will probably address this more. It's been found that minorities, especially African Americans, disproportionately live near fracking wells. The minorities is becoming more of an issue in Colorado when fracking was done out in more remote areas, but as it's moved closer to populated areas, it's more communities of color that are being impacted by that. The next slide. This study was a recent one that came up in the compendium. 43 chemicals are classified as known or presumed human reproductive toxicants, while 31 others are suspected human reproductive toxicants. The studies that follow, I'll be going through, they're all population studies and also called epidemiological studies. And I'm going to be calling them epi studies for short. And these are studies that actually observe human populations. So maternal proximity to fracking has been shown to, was linked to a 50% increased chance of preterm birth. And this was a study that looked at 23,000 birth records in the Eagle Ford Shale of South Texas. And the next slide. Mothers in a retrospective study of mothers in Colorado that occurred between 1996 and 2009 found that mothers in rural Colorado who had babies born with neural tube defects were twice as likely to live in the highest density of wells as compared to those who had no wells within a 10-mile radius. The next slide. Another study that was done, this study was done by the Colorado School of Public Health, Dr. Lisa McKenzie. She found that babies born to mothers with congenital heart defects were 30% or about 1.3 times more likely to live in the highest density of wells compared to those with no wells within a 10-mile radius. And this study is significant because this study was, the Colorado Department of Public Health did an evaluation, I guess you would call it an evaluation, a report on all the studies that had been done, all the epidemiological studies, there were a dozen or so, and they rated them. They summarized how the studies, and this study was, they rated as of low quality, and that it showed a low positive association, and that it had insufficient evidence. And this was CDPHE under Larry Wolk, I will say the name. So there was sort of an effort to, I felt personally, an effort to dismiss some of the studies that had been done. So Dr. McKenzie went back, and in 2019, she did another study and looked at the same, the babies born with congenital heart defects. She looked at mother-infant pairs, and they were the pairs, the mother-infant pairs where the infants had congenital heart defects were 1.7 times more likely than the controls, no congenital heart defects, to live in the highest density exposure groups as compared to the low density groups. And in the rural areas, the likelihood was higher. So she took the information and did a better study, which showed more of a connection. And a lot of the studies we look at, there's not enough, it's hard to get enough observations for those studies to be valid, but they usually go in a they've been going in a direction that tells us these outcomes that we're seeing are real, that there is a connection between that. Studies in California, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma found that low birth weight is higher in the areas of greatest soil activity. There were a study done in Pennsylvania with the highest exposure to oil and gas operations. Babies born to mothers in that area had significantly lower birth weight than those in the lowest exposure area. Another study looked at mothers living 2.5 kilometers, within 2.5 kilometers of gas wells, and that they had more babies with low birth weight and small for gestational age, and also with lower APGAR scores. And a third study of birth weight was done in California, and they looked at 3 million births to mothers living within 10 kilometers of at least one production well between January 2006 and December 2015. And they saw that an increase in active oil and gas development was associated with adverse birth outcomes, mostly in rural areas. Births to mothers in the highest production areas were 1.4 times more likely to result in low birth weight, 1.22 times more likely to result in small for gestational age. On the next slide. I think we're missing, are we missing one? Can you back up one, Julia?
I just backed up one. Let me, nope, that's it.
Low birth weight, okay, and okay, I might have left that out. So go to the next slide. I'm not seeing that slide on there, but I'm going to speak about it anyway. Another study that was done by Lisa McKenzie, Dr. McKenzie, looked at children and young adults in Colorado who were diagnosed with acute lymphocytic leukemia. And they were up to 4.5 times more likely to live in the areas with the highest density of wells as compared to no wells within a 10-mile radius. And most recently, there's a new little cluster that has appeared in southwestern Pennsylvania. In 4 counties, there's been recent cases of Ewing's, I don't know if that's the right way to say it, Ewing's or Ewing sarcoma. It's a rare bone disease. And there were 31 cases observed in these Pennsylvania counties. And that was a 40% increase from cases from 1995 to 2005. And 1995 was a period prior to fracking, and after the fracking started, they saw that jump to a 40% jump. So that's still being, that hasn't really been studied yet. All these studies take time and money and time. So the other impact that is associated with oil and gas development is increased risk of mild, moderate, and severe asthma. And a lot of the studies have shown an increase in emergency room admissions for asthma for people of all ages. So I've just highlighted some of the negative impacts that have been observed, and we could go on and on and on. There's a lot more. There's a lot of evidence. One of my questions is, why is it still happening? Why is it still permitted when 84% of original research studies on human health risks found signs of harm and indication of potential harm? Certainly there's enough evidence from epi studies to tell us that living near fracking operations is very, very likely to be harmful to some pregnant women and to children. Compared to 2017, we now have a much more, I think, open-minded and progressive Colorado Department of Public Health. Theoretically, we've improved the composition of our Colorado Oil and Gas Commission, and we have a legal mandate with 181, and we're still having permits coming. So this is I think part of the problem is that there's not a definitive line for what is protective of public health and safety. There's no magic number. But the city of New York decided that, there's that the fracking crossed that line. The state of New York, banned fracking. They decided that fracking crossed that line of being protective, that you couldn't be protective and have fracking. So did a lot of other cities and states, not a lot of states, but cities and nations followed. So a lot of this comes down to public pressure, to put pressure on our legislators. Well, I'm sure this will come up again in this. We have information, but we don't have policy. And depending on how well we monitor emissions, I mean, our monitoring system's not very good. Hazard assessments, CDPHE did a hazard assessment, and it showed a low level, perhaps slightly elevated risk to public health from pollutants emitted by oil and gas operations. But when you look at the EPI studies that I've shown, those are the studies that are of real people and what happened to real people based on where they lived. Well, or where they lived based on what they happened to them. And it shows that the likelihood that devastating impacts that happen to real people are related to fracking. And these are big impacts. These are birth defects, are not anything small. They're devastating, long-term, costly, traumatic, as are cancers, childhood cancers. And we just don't know how much is too much. So anyway, if you had that last slide there, Julia.
Yeah.
With what you can do. I'm just not seeing it right now.
Yeah, I brought it down. It was up for a while with what you can do on it. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Back up.
No, that's okay. So anyway, for a start, keep influential people informed. We need to repeat the message over and over again that there's ample evidence to show that fracking is harmful to public health. We need to keep pushing to reduce development, whether on private or public land. And one of the things you can do real simply is send or give a copy of the compendium. The link was on the slide, but I can put the link in the chat. Give a copy of the compendium to your healthcare provider, to your own healthcare provider, or send it. It's 460 pages, I think, so you don't want to just copy it. But get it to your healthcare provider. Send it to your representatives, to your state and local representatives, and use it as a resource for testimony. And one thing we can do with that is we can make sure that people that should be informed are informed. And that's a start. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Thank you. All right. Up next, I have Dr. Stephanie Maylin. She is a PhD environmental sociologist specializing in environmental and natural resource sociology, governance, and rural development. She conducts community-based and mixed method research focusing on the community impacts of resource extraction, energy production, and environmental deregulation. So welcome, Stephanie. Stephanie, you want me to share your slides for you?
I can go ahead and share them if that's okay, because then I can control the transitions. Is that all right with you?
Yeah, that sounds good. I may pop off mute and give you a time check if things are running over. Sound good?
Please do. I would appreciate that.
Okay.
I get excited about stuff and forget what I'm doing. So yes, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here talking with everyone this evening and in such amazing company. Thank you, Detlev and Barbara, for wonderful talks. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about social justice impacts. In my research, I look a lot at environmental justice, and I'll explain what exactly that means in the course of my presentation, and also looking at environmental health and impacts of deregulation, like Julia said. So this is kind of a big overview of research that's been going on since about 2012 in Pennsylvania and in Colorado, but I'll be focusing on research funded by National Institutes of Health between 2014 and 2017. but which is still ongoing. For those of you who are wondering what the heck is environmental sociology, because not a lot of people know, I just really quickly wanted to let you know what that means. So as a sociologist, I study systems and structures and institutions. We do not study things like like interpersonal behavior and things like that. Typically, that's the realm mostly of social psychologists and psychologists, but we look at big systems, right? So how communities or states or nation states interact. And in particular, as a scholar of environmental justice, I'm interested in how societies and economies interact with the natural world and how we distribute good things like clean air and bike paths and public transportation throughout our societies, but also how we distribute the bad things, right? Toxics, hazards, and these environmental risks that we've been talking about related to oil and gas and beyond that, right? Specifically related to industrial and extractive systems. I'm also really interested, and this is key to environmental justice, is who decides, right? Who gets to decide how we zone, how we regulate, what sorts of activities we have going on in our industrial society or not, and what do these choices mean for sustainability, right? Social sustainability, economic, and environmental. I won't be talking about this as much because I'm going to focus a lot on environmental and mental health kind of impacts, but it's really important for us to also know that economic sustainability is often talked about, or economic development is talked about as something that oil and gas operators bring to the communities that host these activities. But I also study boom and bust economic cycles, which are always related to extractive industries like oil and gas. I also study them in the context of uranium production, for example. So we often don't see the kinds of economic growth that the industry might point to. And there are some really good studies that have come out recently that I can link to in the chat after I'm done, talking about just that sort of thing. Some that I've been an author of, but others that are ongoing and keep coming out, showing that the economic development isn't as excellent. So when we talk about sustainability, we're talking about a whole host of different kinds of sustainability. And then, like I said, as a sociologist looking at what the institutional context is, you all saw this map, so I won't repeat myself here, but we know a lot of unconventional oil and gas production, which is what I mean by UOG production or ONG production on my slides, that we have this going on all around us. And there's a historic kind of element to this, right? We've had a lot of oil drilling going on in previous decades, but this kind of rapid pace and scale of development that we've seen with hydraulic fracturing and other aspects of this kind of production are unsurpassed. So in the Colorado context, as with many other places like Pennsylvania, Texas, Oklahoma, North Dakota, where we see these kinds of activities going on, social and environmental injustices are becoming more and more documented. And this is what I specifically focus on by doing mixed method studies that I'll explain in a moment. So environmental injustices and health concerns have been well substantiated and are becoming even more well documented. These include things like people being exposed inequitably to environmental hazards related to oil and gas production, as well as the public health concerns that I don't need to repeat because Barbara just did a fantastic job of giving an overview of those. And since I began doing research on this in 2012, we have an exponential increase of peer-reviewed research that shows how problematic these issues are. As a sociologist, I'm also concerned with what happens in communities and what happens with the way that we govern or have regulations around this kind of industrial production. So in terms of community impacts, we're seeing a lot of division. Benefits and costs of unconventional oil and gas production are unevenly distributed across our communities and among or between our communities. So you often have a thin strata of individuals or families who are benefiting quite a bit, who might have leases or well pads on their land and maybe own their mineral rights, but often we're not seeing that as widely distributed or equally distributed as we might think, again, with the discourse by the industry that there's so much economic development related to this. There's also a lot of land use conflicts, right? Should we be doing this kind of activity or not? And then who decides in terms of contested governance? So fighting over who decides zoning and access, and does the state decide? Do communities decide, right? And we know that these choices and decisions have gone all the way to the state Supreme Court. So the context and scale here is that our hydraulic fracturing boom in the US since about 2008 has made the US the #1 producer of hydrocarbons we have seen oil extraction quadruple in Colorado since 2010, and natural gas extraction increased 51% since then as well. So the findings I'll go over are related specifically to a National Institutes of Health funded study that was looking at quality of life and stress related to oil and gas production. I want to mention that Lisa McKenzie, who Barbara talked about a lot of her studies, as well as John Adgate, they're epidemiologists here in Colorado. We were all part of this research team. I was the lead social scientist, and they were leading the epidemiology and exposure part of the study. We have quite a few papers out there that have been published on this. I know they're behind a paywall, so I'm happy to share things with you. If you all are interested in this and you want access to those studies, please let me know. My email address is somewhere in the chat. So this study was over 3 years long. It ended officially in 2017 in terms of what's funded, but I'm continuing to do interviews and photo voice and other things with people because the interest and participation has been so enormous. This was a multi-community mixed method study, which means we looked at multiple places where drilling was going on, and we used multiple methods like surveys, in-depth interviews, and participant observation, which means I go to the places where this is going on, I spend time in people's homes or in areas where there's a lot of drilling nearby. And I also conducted what's called photo voice, which is when we have people take pictures of what's going on, what's impacting their quality of life or stress levels in this case. And we'll see some examples of those at the end of my presentation. And then they provide a narrative about why and how that's important to their daily lives and what we're seeing in those photos. Epidemiology, like I mentioned, was a component of this. So we had 3 different phases of data collection in terms of biomarkers of stress, where we took hair samples, cheek swabs for DNA and RNA, as well as blood samples to gather biomarkers of stress exposure in people's lives. And people who participated were heavily vetted for other pre-existing conditions that, so we had a really rigorous sample of what stress does and how you can measure that in people's bodies. So in terms of environmental justice, what does that mean? Well, distributive justice means kind of the snapshot of where those bad things or toxics and hazards are in our society and who's exposed to them. So when we have environmental injustice in that sense, you have disproportionate exposure of usually poorer populations and minority populations, especially in the US, to these kinds of industrial risks. We have hundreds of studies now in social science and urban planning showing that it's typically communities of color and communities that are poor that are disproportionately exposed to these kinds of distributive injustices. Procedural justice means who decides, right? It's the bigger, more long-term picture of who actually has a seat at the table to meaningfully participate in deciding how we use land, how we use water, what kind of energy systems we want, for example. And many of us know, right, that power is often maldistributed, and you often have industry overrepresented at the table in this case. So the major findings of this study are that institutional context really matters, right? As a sociologist, I study these social systems. And so when we see how people's mental health and their quality of life is being affected or impacted by this, we often look at the institutional context. So what's going on more broadly? In this case, the way in which oil and gas production has been regulated or not regulated in a state like Colorado, the lack of power that people have in affecting that have created institutional and structural contexts that relate to and help drive negative mental health impacts, diminished quality of life, increased and chronic stress and self-reported depression. And this is especially true for people who live really near development, so within a half mile or less of development, and folks who've lived in host communities the longest. If you're interested in this, I just had a study come out in Energy Research and Social Science that looks at these negative mental health impacts in particular and gives a lot of detail, as well as really good representative data from the interviews and other methods that I've conducted. Again, I'm happy to share that with you. I want to identify, as a sociologist, right, we try to identify what mechanisms or drivers cause the problems that we're observing and measuring in the world around us. The first big mechanism here is uncertainty. So people are very uncertain about the economic impacts, the public health impacts, the safety impacts related to unconventional oil and gas production. So uncertainty permeates people's daily lives. People also don't know what institutions to trust and how to access reliable scientific information that's also useful and translated so that people can actually use it to make decisions in their daily lives. So people are left wondering, how do I accurately assess risk across all these different categories? And when you have people with young children children or who are caregivers for elderly folks, this can get even more impactful. The second mechanism is powerlessness. So feeling like most people would report feeling that, in fact, about 90% of the people we surveyed and interviewed reported feeling powerless to impact the scale or the proximity of oil and gas production around them, particularly given that we live in a state where many communities use home rule, meaning that within your city limits or town limits, you can decide as a city or a town what kinds of activities go on there, right? So for example, marijuana dispensaries aren't everywhere because that isn't something that all communities want within their town borders, but oil and gas gets to go beyond that. People are unsure about how to realize that procedural equity, right? So how to have a seat at the table to truly participate. And they have little trust in multiple institutions, especially the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, or COGCC, and the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, particularly before its most recent kind of iteration under the former leadership that Barbara talked about a little bit. Finally, the Colorado State Supreme Court decision in 2016 that said that the state gets to decide, and that banning or barring development is a taking of mineral rights owners' rights to develop their assets, that really stopped local control. And even with 181, I want to point out that's still in rulemaking, right? It's gone through rulemaking for years now. And so that regulation doesn't matter right now. And that's why permits are really being pushed through before that comes into effect in many places. So all in all, the multi-scalar drivers of negative mental health impacts, which means different impacts that we can see at multiple levels or scales, from individual and household to our state, right, are that people have chronic stress and self-reported depression. There are community tensions and social stressors that exist within and between communities, which leads to these really stark divisions, and that the industry has strong meta power, meaning they control the rules of the game, not just what things look like on the ground, but the kinds of institutions that establish regulations and that give recommendations in terms of healthcare and mental health outcomes, for example. So that was crazy looking. I'm going to share just to finish up, a couple of photo voice pictures. These were taken by folks who participated in our study. And again, this is ongoing. If you're interested in participating or being interviewed, please feel free to contact me. This is a picture of a sound wall that was put up about 15 feet from one of our participants' bedrooms. She had her nephew go up on the roof and take this picture for her because of how disruptive this had been. She had open space all behind her for years. She'd lived in the house for decades. And this fundamentally shifted her quality of life, not looking out her bedroom window, for example, and just seeing a wall about 15 feet away. These two pictures were also taken by photo voice participants who had produced water spills in their neighborhoods. And so this was, the fracturing fluid that comes back up, as was described in that really wonderful video, just kind of spilled out in the neighborhood. And of course, this woman's child is trying to ride his bike around. This produced water that we know has contaminants in it and is radioactive. And this is another shot of that same problem and that same produced water spot and spill. And this is just a picture taken that I took from the 2013 floods in Colorado, showing the vulnerability of infrastructure to the increasingly common kind of floods that we'll be seeing with climate crisis. So again, I'm happy to answer questions. I'll look in the chat after I'm done. And then if you want to participate or if you have anything to share or other questions, please feel free to email me at this address. Thank you all.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for all of your important research. I'm going to do a quick agenda shift. We're going to have Mike Foote talk a little bit about the current regulation framework in Colorado right now, both state and local opportunities, before we jump to our impacted community member panel, because I know he has to be off a little bit earlier. So I'm going to welcome him to jump on and speak now, and then we'll intro our impacted community members.
Okay, great. Thanks, Julia. Thanks, everybody. Happy to be here. My name is Mike Foote. I'm currently an environmental and energy attorney, but also a retired at this point legislator. A quote-unquote civilian now, but I was one of the bill sponsors of Senate Bill 181. So I think I was invited on here to talk a little bit about that, as well as what's going on with some local governments at this point, all within about 5 minutes. So, clearly I'm not going to get into everything that's going on, but I'll give you a little bit of an overview. And actually, I think it's pretty good that I'm going after the last presenter, because there are some aspects of Senate Bill 181 and some things that we're seeing at local governments that actually, I think, do give us hope that, that things are in the process of changing. You know, I think it's a little bit too early to say for sure that that's happening, at least when it comes to granting or denying permits, because they just haven't really happened under, or that hasn't happened under the Senate Bill 181 regime yet. But there are some things I think that we can be hopeful for, and particularly in the context of this group that's listening in. You know, it really can come down to some action and work that you do with your local government, depending on your local government, of course. I'm not going to be naive and say that your activism is going to make a huge difference in front of maybe some Weld County commissioners, for example, but certainly with many of local governments in the Front Range area, it can make a difference. And so, you know, I'll talk about that a little bit. But just to give you a very brief primer, I think most are familiar with the situation as it existed before 181, which was passed back in April of 2019. But before that, local governments, at least some of them, tried to step out and exercise their land use authority in order to better regulate oil and gas operations. They were responding to the state allowing huge oil and gas operations to be put in the middle of neighborhoods, basically. And so you had things that were fairly innocuous, like the city of Thornton just trying to add 250 feet to the state setback, all the way to the city of Longmont having a ban that was voted on and approved by the people back in 2012, and a few things in between. But the oil and gas industry and the state, in fact, engaged in a number of lawsuits in the interim there to try to strike those down, and in many cases they were successful. And so that was one of the reasons. There were many reasons, but that was one of the reasons why Senate Bill 181 took the approach that it did, which was making sure that local governments do have the power to go above and beyond what the state is doing when it comes to protective regulations, and also having a co-equal voice in whether or not oil and gas operations are located within the boundaries of those local governments, and if they are, where. So 181 passed, and now we're in the phase where the state, the COGCC, is implementing a mission change, which was another part of Senate Bill 181. They just passed those rules effective January 15th. And there have been a number of local governments that have also changed their regulations. And then now, in fact, we've got the second round of those changes coming. For example, with Adams County and Larimer County, they're looking to update their regulations again since Senate Bill 181 passed. And we're seeing a number of different approaches when it comes to those local governments. On the one end, you know, I'll just kind of reference Weld County again. On the one end, Weld County has their own oil and gas department, I guess. And their rules can really be summed up by saying, we're not going to be any more stringent than we have to. And what they have to is be as stringent as the state. That was established during the recent COGCC rulemaking. Counties like Weld County and Garfield County out west and a few others were arguing that local control really meant that they could go below the basement that was being set by the State Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. And I think 350 and other organizations argued against that, and we were successful in convincing the COGCC that that wasn't the case. So in other words, the COGCC regulations are the floor, not the ceiling. So that means the local governments can go above and beyond, and they can get to a higher ceiling. It doesn't mean under 181 that they can do anything they possibly want. It has to be, quote, under the bill, quote, necessary and reasonable in order to implement a regulation. And so, of course, that hasn't been defined by the courts yet. And so, you know, there's going to be different interpretations of what that means at this point. But we see a number of different approaches. We see Boulder County taking the approach where the oil and gas operators have to basically prove to them that it's conducive to public health, safety, and welfare and the environment to put the facility in where they want to put it in. We have the Weld County approach, as I said, which is drill, baby, drill, basically. And then we have some that are in between on different areas. We have Broomfield, for example, that kind of is more towards the Boulder approach, I think. And the current Larimer County regs are more towards the Well County approach, but that could definitely change. There's new leadership there. But I think when you're doing your advocacy and when you're talking to your local government officials, you want to make sure, of course, to focus on the regs, the regulations that they are adopting if they're trying to do some new regulations. But also, it's just as important to focus on any kind of new permits that are coming through, because it's ultimately going to be their decision as well as the CRGCC's decision. They're co-equal as to whether or not those permits are granted. And so, again, you know, I know that your advocacy can help really at least put forth your view to the local governments as to why you think those permits should or should not be granted. Where we're going to see 181 really play out, and where I think we'll be able to tell whether or not it's been a true success or something short of a success, is when we see these permits that are coming through that are, you know, in kind of neighborhood drilling permits, and whether or not the local governments decide they want to deny those permits or not. They're empowered to do so under 181, but some may not be as interested in doing so, because of course the cautious approach and the approach that lawyers like me, not me, but lawyers like me may advise would be, well, you know, if you don't grant it, then you're going to get sued by the industry, and to be safe, you probably should go ahead and grant it. I mean, that's simplifying it, but that could be part of what you're going to hear. So anyway, the only way that's going to be countered is going to be groups like 350, groups, there's a number of other groups like Logic, for example, is another group that does really good work in this area with local governments and advocating on behalf of local neighborhoods. And people in general, you don't have to be affiliated with the group, but being in touch with your local elected official to say, look, this is too far, you shouldn't be granting this permit, and here's why. So, you know, I'll just wrap up and say the bottom line is 181 gives local governments a lot more power than they had before explicitly to put in much more protective regulations, to deny permits if they think it's appropriate and reasonable and necessary to protect public health and safety, but they got to exercise that power. And that's going to be up to you and others to make sure that they actually do that and take advantage of the power that they've been granted under the bill. So hopefully that didn't go too much farther than 5 minutes. I'll stick around a little bit and answer some questions on the chat if there are any. And I guess, you know, we can go from there, but I really appreciate the opportunity to chat, and please keep up all the good work.
Thanks, Mike. Awesome. So we're going to dive into the impacted community member panel here. I'm really excited about this. Obviously, a lot of great content, a lot of great stuff that people have been saying. We are running a little bit over, but I'm going to take the time that we need to make sure that we get you the information that you need. So stick with us. So I'm going to just do a couple of intros, show you some slides, and then we'll have each of our impacted community member panelists. I'll call on your name, y'all, and then you'll have the opportunity to hear from them about some of the impacts that they're facing really here in Colorado in their communities. So I'm going to share my screen and just intro them really quickly. So here's just a quick map of where we have folks from. We have folks from Battlewood Mesa, Greeley, Broomfield, Erie, and Adams County here with us tonight. The first person who I'm going to introduce is Kristin Logan. She is a mom from Broomfield who is being impacted by the fracking happening there. These are two pictures of some of the fracking wells. The Livingston site that Detlev talked about earlier is pictured here on the left. Just quick warning, this next picture does show a nosebleed. If that is going to make you uncomfortable, feel free to close your eyes now. Kristin's family has been heavily impacted by the oil and gas industry, including nosebleeds that her daughter has been experiencing that have been correlated to spikes in oil and gas activity in her neighborhood. Patricia Nelson is a mother at Bella Romero Academy. Many of you may know this name because it is a school that has been fracked, a heavily controversial site, less than 1,000 feet from the school. You can see right here how close it is to the school playground. This is also an extremely controversial site because it is a clear example of environmental racism and is taking place in Weld County, which is the most fracked county in the state with over 20,000 wells. A 350 Colorado report that we commissioned showed that when you look at the 8-hour levels of benzene exposure, there was air quality monitoring equipment that was at Bella Romero for a while, that children at the school were at that level of benzene, which is a carcinogen, exceeded the 8-hour safe level, which is what California uses, over 211 times during the monitoring period, and it's that close to the school. Larry Foreman, Battlement Mesa, and Leslie are going to be joining us here tonight. Battlement Mesa is a heavily fracked community on the western slope, very close to Rifle, where we talked about the first fracking wells ever were. And so they'll be talking a little bit about what they're experiencing. This red arrow sort of shows the area that they're in. They're on the western slope. Kristin Logan is from Adams County. She's going to be talking about the Ivy site. So this is the site that is extremely close to homes and schools in the unincorporated Adams County area. It's less than 1,300 feet from over 100 homes and will impact nearly 2,000 homes. This site is also incredibly controversial. Over 500 people attended Adams County hearings to protest the site, and over 300 residents submitted public comment during the application period, and the COGCC still went forward with approving the permits in November of 2020. There's a picture of the site. There's a picture of a home. And Eric and Sandra Duggan are joining us from Erie. They're going to be talking about the May J pad, which is right next to their home. This is a map of the fracking that's currently happening in Erie. These green markings right here are frack sites that are in the town of Erie, and these are ones that are close by that are in Weld County. And this is just a quick video of how close this is to the homes in that area. Awesome. So without further ado, I would love to allow our impacted community members to tell you about the impacts that they're facing in their local communities. And let's go ahead and start with Kristin Logan.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a good night tonight. I'm Kristin Logan. I moved to Broomfield in 2015 with a 2-year-old and a young son. I do want to clarify that the nosebleeds that we've experienced, which I'll talk about, they're not something that's actually been correlated yet. We have scientists in Broomfield looking into it, but I, as a parent, have seen a pattern, and I've been tracking all of our nosebleeds religiously, starting way back when my daughter was in preschool. And I personally see a pattern, and I hope that as time goes on, other people will support that and also see that there could be a correlation here. We moved into our home. It was a brand new home, and fracking started nearby my daughter's preschool in Erie. And that's when we first had our first run-in with nosebleeds. She was getting multiple nosebleeds 2 or 3 times a week. And we left to go on vacation after about a month of this. She came back and started kindergarten at a school much further away. Our nosebleeds stopped. We had 0 nosebleeds for a few years. And when the extraction oil and gas project came into Broomfield, they've started back up again, recently in a pretty high frequency. Thankfully, they've slowed down, but so has some of the emission patterns. So it's just interesting to see how all of this is working. We have 84 wells that are being developed in Broomfield. They've been partially started. Extraction did pause the project for some time. We are still waiting to hear when they're coming back, but there is a lot of wells that are still left to be drilled. We went through the fracking process at some sites a little bit further away, close to I-25, and then we also went through the Livingston site being fully developed. The Northwest sites, which are still to be developed, one of them has been partially drilled, but nothing has been fracked, are still out there, and those are very close to my daughter's elementary school. She attends a school which is just catty corner from those sites. So I'm really worried about what could happen when those start back up again. Living here near the Livingston site, we are about 3/4 of a mile away, so we're not within that half-mile radius. So I do point that out intentionally because so many people focus on the 2,000 foot. I'm here tonight to say that 2,000 feet isn't far enough. It isn't looking at the implications that go past 2,000 feet. Our home was completely invaded with noise during the fracking process. It was almost like an amphitheater with all of the noise just coming up here, and it was unbearable. We were up all hours of the night. My kids were afraid to go to sleep because they were afraid of the noise, and if the noise was going to come back. We had 2 little ones crawling into bed with us. It was a long go with the noise, and it happened over and over and over and over and over again, and nothing was done to stop it. Nothing. Our local community did pass an emergency noise ordinance. They did, push hard on that, but unfortunately nothing was done while the impacts were happening. So we lived through it. Nothing stopped it. And it just kind of kept going. Moving into the fracking phase, this happened right at the start of the pandemic. So a lot of people in our community were really concerned about COVID-19 and the impacts that we could have with some of the emissions that would be coming in. Again, everything just kept kind of rolling through as planned, regardless that we were all pretty much stuck in our houses 24/7. So the exposures that we had were really concerning because it wasn't just getting out of the house, going to work. It wasn't, we were here in the height of the fracking with the pandemic on lockdown. And getting outside, all of this was really concerning to us. So this is all of kind of what we're going through is all of this stuff is happening. And then the nosebleeds continued throughout the project, different phases, different nosebleeds. We've seen the most impacts over the past several months, starting in November. Again, these have not been correlated to oil and gas. We have no active drill sites right now. Nobody's fracking, but we do have the Livingston site, which is in production. The spikes that Detlev showed in his presentation, that is very close to my home. The Soaring Eagle Park is the park nearest to my home, less than a half mile away. We can walk to that park and to that monitoring station. And those spikes are really concerning because they continue to happen. And as of right now, there's no known source. But all of this is happening with oil and gas moving in. Like I mentioned, we went a few years without any nosebleeds after we moved my daughter from that preschool into our home. And it wasn't until the extraction project started back up again that we started getting nosebleeds. So it's really hard as a parent to kind of come in front of your local government and talk about these studies that were cited here today. We talked about all of these studies about the increased risk of leukemia. We talked about the nosebleeds, the experience that I had in Erie. We've talked and talked, and it's just, unfortunately, at this point, nothing is really changing. And this is where I have concerns. It seems like everyone's focusing on future drilling, future permits, and there's a large bunch of our population that's just being left behind. We're just being left behind. We're here having impacts. We're here seeing things happening, and it's hard. We're working hard to get people even to listen to us, to acknowledge our concerns, to not say, to try to get someone to actually correlate what's happening, to get a scientist behind us to say, wow, there could be something here. And it's not happening. So I'm concerned that we don't have enough people looking at how to protect people now. I'm concerned that 181 isn't addressing existing projects or already permitted projects. Everyone who is living near these facilities has the right to be protected. We have the right to live in our homes without intrusive noise, without worrying about the nosebleeds, without worrying if this is someday going to be a cancer cluster, if our children are going to be the 1 in 4 that get leukemia. So I'm incredibly concerned that we're not focusing more on existing infrastructure and just trying to focus on the future. I think that we need to put a wider lens on this, and we need to backtrack and look at some of the issues that we're experiencing now and the permits that have already been granted. So that's pretty much it for me.
Thank you so much, Kristin. And definitely, if there's ways that folks can be supporting you, drop those in the chat. We'll be sending stuff out in a follow-up email for ways to connect with all of the local efforts that are happening. Up next, I would love to hear from Patricia Nelson, our mother from Bella Romero.
Hello. So I know I don't have a lot of time, so I'd like to get through as much of the story as I possibly can. So our story didn't begin at Bella Romero Academy. Our story actually began at Frontier Academy. Julia shared some of the demographics of our school. The majority of our students are Latinos. We have a lot of immigrants and refugees from Africa, Burma. And so the original proposal for this site was actually behind a more wealthy, affluent school. And it was members of a local group called Weld Air and Water that organized the mothers of that school, and ultimately Mineral Resources, that was Extraction's company name before they became Extraction, they decided through an internal analysis that that site proposal was not suitable for development. And interestingly enough, in that internal analysis, they decided that 1,250 feet was too close to a playground. And so when you come over and look at the site behind our school, it was less than 700 feet from the playground. So, you know, when you look at the numbers, all of the numbers are different. The state says that the site is about 1,230 feet from the school, which is true. But between the furthest corner of the school, you still have a playground, you still have a soccer field, you have all these places where children are going to recreate. And it's not just children that are going to be in this area during school. We have, you know, we live on a side of town that's geographically isolated from the rest of the town because there's a highway that runs through the town. And so we have 2 parks, we have a swimming pool, and all of these are within a mile of this massive site behind our school. So on top of the exposure kids are getting from school, they're getting exposure when they're playing soccer, because we have soccer tournaments less than a mile away from there. We have, like I said, we have the pool. There was one summer where my niece went to the pool and her nose started bleeding so badly that she had to leave and go home because she couldn't get the bleeding to stop. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, Mike Foote said is, you know, we haven't seen how these rules are going to develop. But like Kristin said, our communities like mine are already being left behind. With all the presentations we've heard constantly over and over again, that communities of color and low-income communities are the most impacted. And I'm here to tell you that that's absolutely true. You know, I've lived here most of my life. I left for about 6 years and I came back. And when I came back, I came to find this total just toxic mess. And, you know, the first time that I knew about this project, I went to a meeting where Dr. McKenzie was presenting her research. And immediately after she was done, a group of attorneys were telling us that they were going to put this site right behind the school. And I remember just literally, I had no idea, just saying, you know, who pays these people? And at the time, the COGCC commissioners were all volunteer positions. And so in their volunteer positions, they had never denied a permit. And, you know, when we talk about the health impacts that these sites have, I know people my age and younger who've had leukemia. I have friends and family members and acquaintances whose children have asthma. You know, so these numbers to me are not just statistics, that this is my life. And the scariest thing is that my son has to go to school there next year. And we're on the wait list to move him to a different school. But other than, you know, I'm running out of choices and we're running out of time. I've had a lot of politicians and even the governor himself talk about, well, we have SB 181 and we have House Bill 1206, you know, but that does nothing for us. You know, in fact, a lot of these new rules and regulations were changed and implemented because of Bella Romero. And, you know, even more upsetting is we have the data that's showing that there are spikes. We have the data showing that these are occurrences that are not stopping. And, you know, and we have these producers that are lying to our communities. They told the school board and they told all the administrators that there would not be any drilling while the children were in school. And naively, everybody believed him. But the reality is that there was no drilling during school, but that didn't stop them from producing and fracking while the children are in school. And that's when we had all of these occurrences of toxic chemicals being spilled out while the children were there. And that's the scariest thing. Two of the three biggest concerns we had was that extraction was going to go bankrupt, that there were going to be chemical leaks, or that the site was going to blow up. And two of those three things are going to happen. And I'm really afraid for my community because there's nothing that's going to stop this until something catastrophic happens. So, like I said, I'm here to tell you that everything you've heard, it's easy just to hear the numbers and the data, but I want you to remember me because this is the face of what's going on.
Thank you, Patricia. Love you so much. Next up,
and I'm sorry, one more thing. I do want to tell you guys that, we tried every way possible that we could think of to stop this project. We had a 4-year lawsuit that almost went to the Supreme Court. But the positive thing that did come out of that lawsuit was that community groups now have the legal standing to bring permits up for judicial review. That was one of the main things that the COGCC and their co-defendant Extraction Oil and Gas were pushing back on, was saying that we just simply didn't even have the right to sue them. So we'll wait and see.
thank you. Such an important point. So disturbing. Next up, I would love to introduce Larry Foreman and Leslie Robinson, if you're still on here, who are from the Battlement Mesa community on the Western Slope, to talk about the impacts that they have faced.
I'll just introduce Larry and Grand Valley Citizens Alliance real quickly. Grand Valley Citizens Alliance has been involved with oil and gas issues since 1997. Oil and gas started drilling in Battlement Mesa in 2010, and Larry joined us about 2014. I'm chair of the Grand Valley Citizens Alliance, and Larry is chair of the Battlement Concerned Citizens. And Larry, take it away.
Okay. Don't forget that we do have a slide of oil and gas basins within Colorado. If we could see those, please. And if you can't get them, that's okay. Let's see. So Battlement Concerned Citizens was formed in order to resist oil and gas, or gas drilling within the boundaries of Battlement Mesa and close to Battlement Mesa. So we did get warning, and what motivated me to get involved was when I heard that Earth's Drilling Company was going to drill next to the water treatment plant, and that just went against what I knew about public health policies. So anyway, with you see the oil and gas on the Western Slope, it's more gas than oil. And we'll probably have gas drilling for quite a while, especially when there's higher prices in Northwest Colorado, especially right around Rifle and Parachute and on the Piance Creek drainage and the Roan Plateau. So anyway, it ended up that my house was my house and my neighborhood were about 800 feet from a drilling pad. And we show them the cartoon, please, of drilling or the cartoon of public lands drilling.
I don't think we got that one, Larry, but I'll show the other slide.
Okay.
I got 3 images,
Okay.
but I'll show them.
Oh, okay, you only got 3. Okay. So the drilling company started with seminars on what they were going to do, and we attended them, and that did not help our mood at all. This is a slide of, on the right is a slide of Battlement Concerned Citizens and Grand Valley Citizens Alliance. I think we're in Denver, and a lot of us testified at a state hearing on drilling and wanting bigger setbacks and that sort of thing, more regulations. And so that's Dave Danny, who was our leader of Battlement Concerned Citizens for a long time. So anyway, when we just sort of protest and try to lobby the Garfield County commissioners, we didn't have much effect whatsoever. We got a few small concessions as far as Ursa Drilling Company buying more equipment for things like dust control and things like that. Just minor improvements in what they were going to do. And I think it was with work by Leslie and Dave Danny and the attorney possibly. They, I think at the state level, they got there was an injection well plan for Pad B, which is the one that's below my house. And the injection well did not get approved. So on Pad B, all of our work did at least avoid the injection well. Let's see. So in general, our lobbying at the state level and the lobbying of all the other groups such as Logic and those groups, it did finally pay off. There was another pad planned for, it's called Pad A, and it was on the other side of the water treatment plant, right up against, or right, it was about 600 feet from the freshwater reservoir that we have. And Pad A was not approved because Battlement Concerned Citizens sued the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission, and it delayed things. And the lawsuit delayed things. So the lower court did not agree with us, but we were allowed to appeal it, and that appeal has still not happened. Another reason for Pad A getting, we think it's been stopped, is just that the drilling company may have had business problems, so they were no longer drilling in our community. I think they could have drilled another well pad. So anyway, when they were drilling, it was 24 hours a day at about 70 decibels in the backyard. When they were fracking, it was 12 hours a day, and it was very noisy and very smelly. And I still am very concerned about what I'm breathing. Occasionally, I smell natural gas pad. It's usually not terrible. On one occasion, it was real strong about a week ago. So, and there's one lady who's in my community in Battlement Concerned Citizens, and she started having nosebleeds when they were drilling by her house. So. So I do have good feelings about our working with the state as far as getting things done. Very positive feelings. So anyway, that's it for me.
Thanks, Larry. Thank you so much. If folks have questions for Larry, feel free to drop them in the chat. So next up, I would love to introduce Kristin Logan, who is going to be talking about the Ivy site in Adams County and her experiences there.
Yeah, it's for 5 years. We've been fighting this in our neighborhood in Wadley Farms. First, Synergy was going to drill 19 wells right across the street from our home. So with a bunch of strong neighbors, we formed a group called ACDAN, Adams County Communities for Drilling Accountability Now. And we started the process of trying to figure out how we could stop it. Of course, we soon found out that that word powerlessness really was a strong word for us, because no matter where we went, it seemed like we were told there was nothing anyone could do. It was just going to happen, and we just better deal with it. But with our group, we kept fighting, and finally, when Ward Petroleum took over the site in Wadley Farms from Synergy, they decided they could drill instead from the Ivy site because now they could do 3-mile laterals. And so they didn't have to use our neighborhood. So then we felt like we just kicked it down the road, actually up the road because it's further north from us, to new neighborhoods. And so we have since then been fighting to stop the Ivy site. A lot of people asked us just to try to mitigate the site, to say, let's just get good conditions of approval. Let's just, you know, make sure it's a safer site because there's really nothing we can do. But ACTAN has steadfastly decided we will do everything in our power to stop the Ivy site. They originally were going to do 26 wells going south and 26 wells going north. And at this point, 12 drilling applications have been approved. They were approved just 2 months before the implementation of the new state rules. And so like I said, I'll just go back. We tried everything. So we filed a protest. Now, I have never written a legal document before, but we stayed up all night and wrote up a protest. It is still pending. Another neighborhood wrote up a protest also. When the directors of objective criteria came into play, we found that the Ivy site met 5 of those objective criteria, being in a floodplain, being near open space, abutting a city, being closer than 1,500 feet from homes. And yet when we talked with Jeff Robbins, we were told that the Ivy site was going to be approved because Great Western had met, in their opinion, all the concerns of the over 300 citizens who wrote in public comments objecting to the well applications. So then he also mentioned that anyway, nobody near the site complained. Nobody complained, but over 300 people did. And at a prior public hearing with the county, over 500 people showed up to protest the Ivy site. So what this showed to us is that they're not listening to our voices. I guess all I can say is to make it short is, if this starts coming to your community, just fight, fight, fight. Do everything you possibly can. The thing we're doing now, thanks to Colorado Rising, is ACTAN filed a couple lawsuits, one against Great Western because they're not following the agreement they made with the county to follow the latest, strictest standards of the rule of the law. It was originally in the MOU that was signed between Great Western and the county. And so we're asking them to follow the new strictest standards. The other lawsuit is the constitutionality of the forced pooling. Oh, what else? My husband's here, so all I can say is hard to say. 5 years of fighting the Ivy site is also logic helped us a lot. When we had a community meetings, they were there to help us get the flyers out. We did a lot of door-to-door trying to educate people. And yet, if you go on the next door site of the people surrounding the Ivy site today, with the 2 drilling rigs there, it was a gift from Great Western to give us 2 drilling rigs so it wouldn't take as long to drill. The people there, even though I think we knocked on every door in those neighborhoods, people are still saying, what the heck is going on over at 152nd and York Street? So education is a big one. That's what our group tries to do, is educate residents on the impacts that these sites will have on them so that they can fight sites coming into their neighborhoods. There were 368 pending drilling applications at the time SB 181 passed in unincorporated Adams County. Almost every one of those drilling applications has been approved. So we are being inundated with new drilling sites in Adams County.
Thank you, Kristin. Definitely let us know if there's ways that folks can support your efforts. Please drop those in the chat or email them to me, and I'll make sure to send them out to everybody who registered for the call in a follow-up email. So last up, I would love to hear from Eric and Sandra Duggan, who are in the Erie community, who are being impacted by the May J site.
Yes, hello. So we moved to Erie last September, and at the time we were, I'd say, largely ignorant of all the oil and gas development. It was, you know, with the big housing crunch, we were just excited to find a nice house that was in commute distance of Boulder. And it was in January where suddenly the sound walls went up for May J, and we started to find out what was going on and get a quick education about all of this stuff that we've talked about tonight, all the health impacts, everything that we might have to be worried about. And May J is the first fracking site that has gone up, but we're actually close to 3 separate well sites that are just north of our neighborhood, Collier's Hill, in unincorporated Weld County. That has kind of fallen through a weird crack in terms of like who wants to look out for us, which seems to be no one amongst all the state agencies, and timing. So the wells were actually originally drilled a couple of years ago, and they were supposed to have been completed before all the housing of our development had been built out, but because of financial issues and the sale of the company Anadarko to Occidental, it was delayed. So they didn't, and then with the pandemic as well, it also delayed things. So by the time they'd finally been doing the completions and the fracking, there were now houses within 1,000 feet of the May J site. And that's what we've had to deal with for the past month. It's been hugely impactful to our community and some other friends that we have there, with trucks operating all night long, the sound walls, fumes. And then now there are 2 more sites, Yellowhammer and Papa Joe, that are also going to be starting fracking this week, for a total of 28 wells, all in this kind of confined area right to the north of this neighborhood. And I mean, a lot of things people talked about tonight really echo for us. And I think the powerlessness is one of who is responsible for this and who wants to take credit. There was a community hearing in February, which the Occidental did not attend to answer for anything, but Weld County did show up. The OGCC showed up, CDPHE, the town, and it was just a shifting blame of who is responsible for this, who approved this, and what can we do now? So quickly trying to pull together a neighborhood of concerned citizens. What we're really just pushing for is that Erie, even though it has a long history of being involved in oil and gas development, and especially on the Weld County side, being very beholden to it, to join our surrounding communities, including Broomfield, Longmont, and Boulder, and having active air quality monitoring, and getting communication and recognition for our citizens about when it's safe to be outside. We personally feel terrible about the fact that because of the completions after that happens in the flowback phase, when it's most dangerous for VOCs, we are now looking at might not be able to really use our deck at all over the summer, because this is what's going to be happening.
Or open our windows.
Or open our windows. And now we've invested over $1,000 in air purifiers. So it's just a constant battle to try and figure out what we can do to not be left behind, to not just be the guinea pigs in the science experiment of our health.
And I think what concerns us most are the short-term side effects we're seeing health-wise, and what that could amount to in the long term. By being vocal about our advocacy, we started a Facebook group with other neighbors in our immediate neighborhood, and so many of them have reached out to us to let us know that they've been using their weekly inhaler 3 to 4 times a week, or their 5-month-old baby is coughing. They've increased headaches, dizziness, you name it. It's like a checklist of the health side effects we've talked about tonight. We're experiencing it all. And because some of private residents have bought private consumer air quality monitoring, the purple air one, which is nowhere near what we need, but at least gives us an indication of when there's a spike in the air. We know that we are well above 600 AQI at times, just off the charts in terms of air quality. And we know to stay inside and to keep our windows closed, but that dissonance that our sociologist panelists pointed out to is really concerning, of seeing people out walking their dogs, walking their babies right in front of the site, and not really being educated by the town or the county or anybody on the very legitimate risks that they're facing. So a lot of what we've been pushing for, along with air quality monitoring, that is not contingent on oil and gas or provided by them, such as the canary that is proposed by the COGCC, but rather we're pushing for bolder air. But another thing that we're really trying to work on is educating our community. So we've done flyers, we're working on a workshop, just anything to let people know, because I think coming from the Northwest, one of the things we expected was everybody expects to face problems wherever they move. What we didn't expect was the apathy from our neighbors and how many of them are beholden to oil and gas. And that has been incredibly frustrating, and just, it's really hard to fight such a big machine as oil and gas.
Thank you so much. Definitely, if there are folks from Erie, from that community on this call, Eric and Sandra, if you can please share with us how folks can get involved and support your efforts. I can send that around in a follow-up email, or if you want to drop it in the chat, I think that would be helpful for folks. So that wraps up our impacted community member panel. Thank you everybody for sticking with us to hear the important things that all of these folks have to say. I think the number one thing that we can take away from this is that Colorado is not doing enough to protect our local communities from the impacts of oil and gas infrastructure and fracking. SB 181 is not enough. We need to keep working to pass stricter regulations, both at the state and at the local level, to ensure maximum protections for our communities. Okay, our communities' health, our environment, our climate should not come secondhand to the short-term impacts of the oil and gas industry. And so I wanted to leave you just with a little bit of information about where you can go to next. I know this was a lot of information, a lot of really heavy information, but 350 Colorado is taking these issues very seriously. We want to support you. We want to support your communities and doing whatever it takes to make sure that you have the protections necessary. So on this slide, just have a couple of things that are coming up after this presentation today. So we are going to be launching a local regulation toolkit. So this is going to be sort of a 101 toolkit on how to pass local regs, local ordinances for oil and gas restrictions in your county or municipality or local government. And that'll be launching next week. We'll be sending that around likely in a statewide email. I'll be sending it around to all the registrants on this call as well. But be sure to be sharing that with anybody that might be interested. To follow up on that, next Tuesday, March 23rd, we are actually hosting an impacted community member workshop. This is going to be a grassroots organizing workshop that is focused on passing local regulations in your community. So first half will be focused on 101 and grassroots organizing. Second half will be focused on campaign planning for passing local regs in your local area. On Thursday this week, there's the first ever joint commission hearing between the Air Quality Control Commission and the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. And there is a youth press conference that some of our youth activists are going to be putting on at 8:15 a.m. That information is on our calendar and our website. So feel free to join that if you are interested. And lastly, if you are not an impacted community member and you want to take action on fracking, we do have a fracking campaign committee that you can join and find out all sorts of different ways to take action on fracking. Pretty much every day of the week, we have something that you can do to take action on fracking. So I just wanted to thank our wonderful expert speakers and our panelists so much for their courage and vulnerability and being welcome to be here, and the expertise of our presenters. Thank you everybody for sticking with us. I know we're a bit over. I will stay on for just 5 or 10 minutes in case anybody has burning questions, but otherwise I will bid you all adieu and hope that you will join us in our continued efforts to stop this extremely extractive and destructive industry. So round of applause for everybody who presented and was a panelist, and thank you everybody for joining on. So we'll see you all next time. And for folks who do want to, yes, I am going to be sending a recording of this around. And we did invite all the state lawmakers to this call. We will be sending them a recording of the event as well. And all the local elected officials from impacted communities in addition. So if anybody has specific questions, feel free to type them in the chat. We'll try to get to a couple of them, but otherwise folks can just go ahead and jump off. Looks like we did a good enough job of answering people's questions. I'll try and pull any from the chat and see if I can send answers to folks after I finish downloading the recording. But I'm going to go ahead and stop the Facebook Live.
Thanks, Julia. That was wonderful. And Chris and Kate and Patricia.
Dr. Barbara. Dr.
Yeah.
Barbara, this is Sandra Dugan. We were just really compelled by your presentation, and we're wondering if there's any way we could get in touch with you further, or if you see patients at all at this time.
Yeah, I'm not a doctor. My background's in public health, so don't come to me. But we do have numerous physicians we have many physicians that are part of PSR.
Okay.
If what kind of we should